So today is week 3 in our topic, family drama and divine grace. Has anybody remembered the previous weeks that we've done and been following along? We've been tracking the lectionary readings, but because of what happened, was it last week or the week before, we've offset them by one. So we're actually still talking about last week's reading. So you've had time to process it, of course, the week before. In this week's story, we find Rachel and Jacob's favorite son. Who was their favorite son? Joseph. Though reported dead, is sold into slavery by his brothers. How family favoritism and envy nearly destroyed a family. And as the soap opera person would say, and how the providence of God is found, hiding in the bottom of a pit. How when you're listening to those things, they dramatize them all. This story doesn't need a lot of dramatization because it was possibly the origin of many soap operas. And personally, we can see how even when families throw you away, God is still writing your story. We discussed that last time. God is still writing your story today. At least that's how it would sound in an episode of the soap operas. But let's have a look at some of the details of this story and how we can grab some of them and think, hold it, do they still apply to life today? Siblings. How many of you have siblings? Most of you have siblings? Recent studies suggest that 1/4 of adults still argue with their brothers and sisters. I'm seeing nodding going on here. No. And more than 20% still bicker about who the favorite child is. That doesn't happen in your family, does it? You were the favorite because of this. You were the favorite because of this. You were the favorite. I remember in my family, of course, the child that has an affinity with the parent in a particular area seems to be the favored one in that particular area. My brother, Frank, always went fishing with my dad, and so they seemed to have this bond of fishing. And so anytime there was nothing happening over the weekend, my dad would kind of look at my brother, or my brother would look at my dad. What do you think we should do this weekend? Yeah, let's go fishing. It was just done. It was done and dusted. So perhaps things haven't changed that much since Joseph's time. The story of Joseph is an ancient story, but its issues we find are very, very modern. Jealousy, favoritism, resentment, bitterness, and broken relationships. Have there any of you ever seen or experienced a dislocation of your relationship with your parents, or brothers and sisters dislocation? Have you seen that sort of thing happen? Where one parent or one sibling might not talk with someone for a long, long time. And sometimes the people who you think you can trust the most are the people who seem to cause the greatest distance. When you're close with someone, little things can cause big things, can't they? Big issues. It's sad. I can relate to some of these things myself because I was actually the youngest of 5 children. My brothers and sisters grew up at a time when there were few resources in the family, and life was very different. Mum made their clothes for them, even though they were not fashionable clothes, they thought at the time. When your mum makes your clothes, even if they're the same as everybody else, if your mum makes them, you think, oh, do I have to wear it, Mum? And Mum and Dad grew food, and of course you always want what other kids have. And if other kids have the takeaway, then you think, how come we don't have as much takeaway? So my brothers and sisters grew up in that sort of very conservative environment with regard to resources. By the time I came along, our family was more well established and a lot more financially stable. Both parents worked, and we actually had disposable income by the time I came on the scene. We had dessert every night. And my brothers and sisters look at me and say, "You had it so good, James." And you know what? I think they were right. I was born into the environment where I felt particularly blessed. But I was also understand that what I felt blessed in, other people felt I was overblessed. I was spoiled. I don't know if you can relate to some of these things. Things were very different to what my siblings have, and there was always a comparison. Even when we get together for family reunions, they talk about how hard things were for them and how easy things were for me. And that's a part of the issue that happened in the family of Jacob. Favoritism. Favoritism can create deep divisions. Genesis tells us that Jacob loved Joseph more than his other sons. And Jacob made no secret of it. He gave Joseph a special robe and visible signs. It was a visible sign of his father's favoritism. It wasn't just a piece of clothing. Every time the brothers saw Joseph wearing that robe, they were reminded that their father treated him differently. And as a result, resentment crept in. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 4, we read, "When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than the others, they hated him." Those are strong words, aren't they? They hated him, and they could not speak a word to him. It actually caused a barrier. That's how quickly favoritism can destroy a relationship. Instead of bringing a family together, it creates comparison. It creates competition. Instead of saying, "We are brothers," people began thinking, "Why does he get what I don't?" And the problem wasn't only Jacob's actions, it was also Joseph's words. Joseph also contributed to the tension. Joseph brought bad reports back to his father. "Those guys aren't doing their job." And it didn't continue, it didn't stop there. It began festering when Joseph started having dreams in which all the brothers, would bow down to Joseph. Can you imagine being in that situation? Your little brother says, "One day you're going to be bowing down to me," and what would your feelings be? Who do you think you are, young whippersnapper? Whether Joseph understood the dreams or not, his brothers certainly did, and they resented growing up with a kid like that. We need to be careful here, because family relationships can be damaged very easily. Sometimes it's what we do. Sometimes it's what the other person does. And sometimes it's simply the way circumstances appear to us, the way we perceive what's going on. We can look at things differently because we are different personalities, different on the pecking order in a family environment. But resentment has a way of growing. And if we allow it, it can actually multiply and change. And that's what we're going to read about in the story next. Resentment can be taken further than we ever intended. Joseph's brother weren't simply irritated by what was happening. Their resentment became hatred. And eventually hatred became a plan. What did they plan to do? When Joseph came looking for his brothers, they saw him in the distance, they saw him from a distance and said, "Here comes the dreamer." They had labeled him the dreamer. And they began to plan his death. I hope that doesn't happen in your family. I hope that's never happened in your family. Thinking about it, these brothers were supposed to be protecting their little brother. But what did they do? They were discussing how to get rid of him. Now, in the story, we read about two brothers, Reuben and Judah. Reuben and Judah were the ones that actually stopped the other brothers from actually killing him. They said, no, let's not kill him. Let's just stick him down this hole. Now, from 2 or 3 weeks ago, tell me what was so special about Reuben and Judah? Can anybody remember? Yeah. But what about, who was Judah and Reuben's mother? It was Leah. It wasn't Rachel. It wasn't the favoured. It was the one that wasn't favoured. They, both Reuben and Judah, grew up with a parent that knew what it was like to not be the favoured person. They were taught levels of compassion that the other brothers might not have been taught in having the same mother. And they were the ones that said, no, let's not kill him. I have a feeling that they were actually afraid for Joseph. And they were thinking, without sounding like the prudish brothers, the conservative brothers, they thought, how do we make it so that they don't end up killing our brother? So they were the ones that softened. Everything that the brothers said, they softened and made it so that let's just put him down the hole. Let's not hurt him. And then the other brother said, let's just sell him to instead of killing him, and let's just sell him. And so that's what happened. And so Joseph was sold into slavery. The brothers then took Joseph's special robe, and what did they do? They covered it with goat's blood, and they took it back to their father, and they told their father, I'm sorry, this is what we found. He must have been killed. Can you imagine what Jacob was thinking? His favourite son died in an accident. Some of you have had family members who have passed away. And the ripples that go through, the grief. We even say how horrific it is for you to see the death of your own children. It is a horrible thing. What started as favoritism grew into jealousy. Jealousy became resentment. Resentment became hatred. And hatred eventually led to them doing something that was that wasn't as horrific as killing, but was also pretty bad. It affected the whole family for years. Jacob thought that his son had died. That's the danger of allowing bitterness to take root in one's heart. We can become so focused on what someone else has or what someone else doesn't have that we lose perspective on things, don't we? And we think, what do we have to do to stop these feelings, even at great expense to others? They lost their bearings. The brothers had difficult circumstances, sure. They worked hard and they carried great responsibility, sure. And Joseph appeared to have great privilege in the family, sure. But hardship does not automatically make people better. We hope that going through hard things, I mentioned this morning about a young boy who has polio, who might actually be changed for the better because of the pressures on his life. But some people react the other way, don't they? And they do become bitter. Sometimes hardship can make someone bitter. And someone's privilege can cause someone to be careless. The circumstances that we face are not always in our control. Sometimes a child that gets favoured is just the child that gets favoured. Is it their fault? Not necessarily. It's the parents that might actually be at fault by allowing this strange misbalance. Our circumstances can test our character, and that's what happened with Joseph. And they give us opportunities to trust God, which is what happened with Joseph, which can bring us to the third point today. God is at work, even when we cannot see what He is doing. One of the remarkable things that happened in this story about Joseph is that while everything appeared to go wrong, God was still at work. You might find it interesting. So the story goes that Joseph was sent out to go and look for his brothers. Do you know how far he was sent to go out to look for his brothers? 80 kilometres. So he had to walk 80 kilometres out to find his brothers. And did he find them straight away? No. By the way, do you know how long they were sent out for at a time? Between 3 and 6 months. So he didn't have contact with his father other than when, or should I say, the sons normally didn't have contact with their father. They were sent out to graze, find a good grazing spot for the cattle, stay there for the season, then bring them back at the other times. So Joseph merrily went to where he thought they were, and he couldn't find them. Fair dinkum, he couldn't find them. Now, in that situation, here he was, someone, the story tells us, someone found him wandering around looking for his brothers and said, "What do you look lost." And Joseph said, "I'm looking for my brothers, I don't know where they are." And this guy said, "Who are your brothers?" "Oh yes, I spoke to them." This was actually a miracle. Read the story and you think, gee, this is a fluky situation for him to stumble across someone who knew where they were. They were another 20 kilometers down the road in another area. So he said, "Thank you very much." And so he went off. In that situation, he might not have found them. He might have gone home and this story would never have happened. Maybe God was in this story, even through the strange times. So he went out, found them, and sure enough, he found them and, what happened? Did things all go well for Joseph? Not at all. The brothers decided that they'd end him. A couple of the brothers, who were trained from birth with a mother who was more compassionate than others, eased things, brought things into line. And when he was down in the pit, Joseph must have been thinking, "This is a disaster. This is horrible." But God worked even through that. This was actually a part of God's plan. Joseph, we've got someone falling asleep anyway. I better make this story a bit more exciting, I guess. Joseph wasn't protected from the betrayal of his brother. He is not protected from being sold by his brothers. He's not protected from becoming a slave. But none of this prevents God from fulfilling his plan. His plan was to use all of these things to bless not only the family, but to bless an entire nation and to bless people beyond. Do you know when Joseph was in his position and he was able to make it so that grain was stored up for 7 years, for another 7 years, do you realize that there were many nations that were saved because of this act? And none of this would have happened if it hadn't have been for these hard times that he went through. He could have said, "God, I feel cursed." But he was able to see eventually. And we're going to find that out next week, aren't we? What actually happens. It's a bit like the soap operas. You've got to stay tuned for the final episode, which is going to happen next week. The conclusion. Perhaps there is something in Joseph's family that reminds you of your family. You've gone through some hard times, I'm sure, with family members. When you've felt isolated, when they've persecuted you, when you've thought, how come I'm getting the bad end of the stick here? Or you've seen favoritism. Another member of the family receive blessings that you haven't received. And you think, how is this fair, God? And we've got to think of what we need to do to hand things over to God and say, "God, I don't understand, but you probably do." Perhaps there is something that you need to consider this week and think, "God, if I hadn't been in that situation, how would life have changed for me? And what can I do right now?" Joseph couldn't see the future from where he was standing. His brothers couldn't see their part in God's plan. And sometimes these are the beginnings of faith. Faith is believing in something that you don't understand, trusting God with your future, just laying it in His hands and saying, "God, I've continued to pray for this week after week, month after month, year after year, and I haven't seen anything." And that's when you've got to have your greatest amount of faith. Believing in things that you can't see, that are not happening. And trusting God and saying, "God, I don't understand, but I'm going to trust you.